bella figura. Why do the clergy wear special clothes? I'm going to start by mentioning the role of clothing in human history and our understanding of it. And then we'll look at some of the garments that we wear for Mass and talk about the history of them. People have been generally wearing clothing largely to protect the body against the ravages of the climate, be it hot or cold, wet or dry. So in its broadest sense, clothing is defined as the coverings of the torso and limbs, as well as the coverings for the hands and the feet. In most societies, people wear clothing for social as well as functional reasons. Wearing clothes carries specific meanings. In numerous cultures, for instance, it's not acceptable to show certain parts of the human body. Religion, custom, and historical circumstance have shaped the way different people in various times feel about clothing and exposure of the human body. Clothing has been regarded as one of the best ways to distinguish social class, gender, occupation, marital status, or ethnic or religious affiliation. But to correctly interpret the messages a particular set of clothes may transmit to others, you must understand the specific dress code. An example would be the wearing of white at a funeral in Western society is considered inappropriate, while Eastern societies would endorse such a colour selection for people in mourning. We recognise roles by clothing, policemen, medics, the armed forces and so on, and also by occasion, whether we are at work, at play, in formal or casual attire. Clothing evolves over the years for a host of reasons: taste, fashion, usage, adaptation to different circumstances. When it comes to what clergy wear as liturgical dress, this was an adaptation of the secular clothing commonly worn throughout the Roman Empire in the early Christian centuries. The priest, in discharging his sacred functions at the altar, was dressed as in civil life, but the custom probably grew up of reserving for this purpose garments that were newer and cleaner than those used in his daily work. And out of this gradually developed the conception of a special liturgical dress. So let's start with the cassock that I'm wearing now. It's a distinct form of vestment that's not specifically reserved to clergy or indeed for services and worship. It's long-sleeved, it's hoodless. Depending on the climate, it's made of lightweight material or heavier wool to keep you warm. It's generally black, although in more tropical climates, white is worn. It's usually worn under vestments, although it is an outer garment, and some ministers and priests do wear the cassock outside, and therefore it's similar or identical to the habit of a monk or a nun. And then there's the collar, the clerical collar, or more informally known, the dog collar. The Roman collar closes at the back of the neck, presenting a seamless front, whereas the more recent styles are that of a plastic insert that goes into a slot in the top of the shirt. Just alongside that, there are also preaching bands, which are, I've got them here, which you may recognise, that are also worn around the neck. Clerics and lawyers wear them. They derive from the same piece of clothing that was wrapped around the neck to protect the neck in the days when people wore a ruff in the 16th century. And from that piece of clothing came the clerical collar and the bands. Ruffs, incidentally, are still worn by the clergy in the Church of Denmark, as seen recently in Channel 4's series Ride Upon the Storm. It's a gripping story, the clerical family. Do watch it. Now let's go on to the alb. From the Latin, albus, meaning white, is simply a long white linen tunic, a derivative of ordinary first century clothing used by the Romans. It was adapted early by the Christians. And so today the alb is the most common vestment for all ministers at the Mass. And a more modern form that you may be familiar with is the Cassock alb, simply a combination of a cassock and an alb. And then there is the surplice, from the Latin, from over garment, over a fur garment. And then further is the cotta, and cotta comes from a Latin term meaning cut off in Italian, it cuts off the alb. And all four of these are all from the same source, really. So this is the alb in all its fullness, as you can see, with narrow arms. Then we have the Cassock alb in one form. And then we have a simple surplice, just a gathering at the top and fairly short and wide sleeves. And finally the cotta, which can be shorter or longer, narrow sleeves with a squared shoulder, and sometimes, but not always, with some lace. And next we have the stole. This is my ordination stole. The stole derives from the Latin word stola, and related to a Greek word, which just simply means a garment, and was originally a kind of shawl that covered the shoulders and fell down in front of the body. After being adopted by the Church of Rome around the 7th century, the stole gradually narrowed and started to feature more ornate designs. Now I have a fairly plain one, but you can see from later periods in the Church's history, when ornamentation was all the thing and all the rage, to match the rather impressive chasubles, which we'll come on to in a moment. The likely origin for the stole is related to the scarf of office among imperial officials in the Roman Empire, as members of the clergy became members of the Roman administration when Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire. They were granted certain honours, and the stole designated their rank. And indeed, it's a function which the stole continues to perform today. So unlike other liturgical garments, which were originally worn by every cleric or layman, the stole was a garment which was specifically restricted to particular classes of people based on their occupation. A bishop or priest wears the stole around his neck like so, with the ends hanging down, while the deacon, it's from the left shoulder tied on the right-hand side at the waist. During the English Reformation, the stole, along with all other sacramental vestments, were removed from the Church of England. It was only in the 19th century, with the Oxford movement, that an interest began in the pre-Reformation worship, and eventually the stole, along with other vestments, was revived among Anglo-Catholic clergy. And then finally, the chasuble, of which we have a selection here, and as I was saying earlier, some of them are very plain and some more decorated, reflecting the changing fashions and tastes, and indeed instructions from the church authorities. Chasuble originated as a sort of conical poncho, called in Latin a casula, meaning a little house, that was the common outer travelling garment in the late Roman Empire. It was simply a rough oval piece of cloth with a round hole in the middle through which to pass the head, that fell below the knees on all sides. And that is essentially what we have here in all their different forms and developments over the years. So what I briefly described is what we put on as we prepare for Mass and as we celebrate Mass. And I suppose for my own reflection, dressing up is something that we do when we do something special, when we go out for a party. And it's very much the same thing here, that we dress up, we're coming into the Lord's presence as the people of God. We are preparing the Holy Mysteries. We are receiving the sacraments. So it's not just a historical tradition, all this finery, but we are engaging in a sacramental act, the meeting of heaven and earth, of the Eucharist, the foretaste of the kingdom of God, of bringing people together as the people of God at the banquet. It's full of joy, it is special, and in that we rejoice, and we give thanks that we can come together as the people of God around his table and dress up for a party.